So I thought it'd be helpful first of all just to tell you what the overall kind of theme of this paper is. So the last one that you did was about global geography, so that means things happening at a world scale. This one is only about the UK. So actually it's kind of easier because it's a lot more localised. You know that the maps you get are going to be of some part of the UK. That could include Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England. But actually you've got to learn a little bit less in terms of the knowledge of places. However, the bit that you do need to know about is specific processes. So this exam paper is really challenging you to think about how the UK has been shaped and changed physically, that's section A, by weathering and mass movement of material. That just means when lots of material moves quickly, like slumping or rock slides or landslides. How it's been shaped by rivers, so through erosional processes such as attrition, abrasion, solution, hydraulic action. How sediments transported, such as siltation, suspension, solution and traction. And how sediments deposited by those rivers as well, forming different landscapes like deltas and levees. Coasts is actually fairly similar to rivers, and this is where you can gain really good marks. The processes for coasts are largely the same. Those types of erosion are exactly the same. The transport of material in the coast is exactly the same. The only difference that you need to have and revised is how rivers will be managed slightly differently from coasts. And we're going to have a look at that in a moment. But coastal processes are, the only big difference would be things like longshore drift and how we then manage the coast using things like rock armour, groins and gabions. When we're looking at river management, we might use big hard engineering strategies like dams, for example, to stop the flow of water. We might build man-made levees to try and raise the sides of the river so it can hold more water. Or we might use soft engineering through things like afforestation, which means planting trees, or simply watching the river level, monitoring it. And you need to definitely revise those ideas of river landforms and river management. That hasn't come up yet in any of the exams, so I think it's likely to have a bit of a rivers twist to it this year. Then you obviously need to know how humans have shaped the landscape, and to be honest, we're pretty boring. We do the same sort of stuff everywhere we go. We cut down trees, deforestation, that shapes the landscape, it clears it. Why do we cut down trees? We deforest trees to clear land for farming. That disrupts ecosystems and habitats, doesn't it? When we dig up the ground, we plant in crops, for example, and clearing it of other natural things that would have been there. We also shape the landscape by urbanisation, and that simply means we cut down the trees, deforestation, and then we build things on it like houses or shops or roads and transport networks. And that shapes the landscape, it changes it, it disrupts it. So this paper is all about how these different things here, weathering, mass movement, rivers, coasts and humans, have shaped the landscape of the UK. And that's essentially all the paper's about. There's then a bit of the human geography of once we live in those different areas, those towns, cities and rural areas, what does it feel like? What does it look like? How does a rural area look different from an urban area? Why have so many people moved into urban areas? What are the causes? Why do some people move out of urban areas and choose to live in the rural? And then there's the negatives and positive impacts that humans have on the landscape as well. Thinking about things like migration or foreign direct investment, for example. So it's really important to make sure that you've covered all of that content through looking at your CGP guide. Your green CGP guide is absolutely excellent for all of these sections. The last section, fieldwork, was when we went on 2 trips to explore how the coast has influenced the landscape of Feltham Beach, and then we went to Brighton to see how humans have shaped the human geography of that landscape. And we wanted to find out why some areas were so different from each other in Brighton, even though they were only a short distance away. So this paper is all on the theme of UK geography, and these are the key topics to revise. Now, if you just listened to that section and thought, I don't know exactly what I need to revise, this is the topic checklist, which has been on Arbor since, I think, Easter, when you did your last set of mock exams. It shows you exactly which pages to go to in your green revision guide. And I've also put in bold here the case studies that you need to revise. So in this paper, the 8 markers will be unseen resources and maps for section A, B and C. In section C, there will be an 8 marker where you write about your own fieldwork, but I'll talk about that a bit later. However, there are also marks to gain from using your own case study knowledge. So you can see here, for example, in geology and coasts, it says CS, Snowdonia and the Weald in your CGP guide. And as they're only worth 4 marks, I would simply put Snowdonia on one side of a flashcard, and on the other side I would bullet point maybe 2 or 3 specific facts I want to remember about that location. I'm going to show you now the side for UK human geography and what you need to know. Okay, so exactly the same as the last one. You can see this is the human geography you need to revise. Now, the only thing I would say about this paper, and where some students really trip up a little bit, is that there are lots of really big keywords. For example, on here, I can already see it says rural periphery, government policies, globalisation, privatisation. You might be looking at that thinking, what on earth does that mean? Well, first of all, you could look in your revision guide and it shows you here the pages to find that on. But secondly, I've emailed home to both you and your parents the glossary, which means the list of keywords and what those keywords mean. So if you're someone who actually knows a lot of geography, but you often look at an exam question and think, I don't think we've learnt that, I can't remember that key word, then your key thing to focus on is to make some flashcards with the keyword on one side and the definition on the other. And the more that you look at those and repeat them, particularly before you go to bed at night, the more they will go into what's called your long-term memory. So when you get into the exam, if you see the word privatisation, you'll know straight away, oh, that's businesses that used to be owned by the government, which they've now sold to private companies, for example. You can also see in UK Human, the case studies are much easier. You basically need to know all about London and Sevenoaks, and they are in your revision guide. There will be at least 2 case study questions on London or Sevenoaks, so it's really important you revise these. Let's take a look at the case studies now and have a chat about what you need to know. Okay, so if you were in class this week, then you'll have seen this PowerPoint slide already. It's got on here the key case studies that you need to know around the UK for section A. As you can see, it says them as we learnt them in class, but then in brackets underneath, some of them have a slightly different case study in the CGP guide. And it doesn't matter if you can't remember the Lake District and you're looking at your CGP guide, just do a flashcard on Snowdonia. The examiner who's marking your paper won't know what case study you learnt, so as long as it's one that's appropriate, you'll be absolutely fine. Equally, looking at that river one there for the River Severn, Wales, and it says in your CGP guide, the River Eden, if you get a question and it asks you about a river from source to mouth, and you can only remember the River Thames, for example, use the River Thames in your exam. If you can't remember the whole Ness coastline, but you can remember Bognor or Feltham Beach because maybe you went there this half term or you live there and you go there regularly, use those beaches, use your geography knowledge that you can remember best. These are the ones I would revise, but I wouldn't spend too much time on this, just a quick flashcard for each one and then move on. Okay, so this is where I really would invest my time on my revision. As you can see here, we need to know a little bit more for section B, but there's only 2 potential places that could come up for section B. London as the primate city and capital city of the UK, which is written really well in the CGP guide, and also Sevenoaks in Kent, which is the rural region we learnt about. It's where many people move to because they can easily commute to London, yet they can have a better quality of life in the rural with bigger houses, access to leisure and all those sorts of things too. So if it was me, I would make a few flashcards on London and a few on Sevenoaks using my CGP guide, and I would revise these ones the most. The reason for that is I feel that I could personally talk about a river or a coastal area that I know about quite easily. I could make that up in the exam if I needed to, as long as it was relevant to the question. However, I would not feel confident walking into the exam making something up about London or Sevenoaks. There's just too much that I need to know. So if you're looking at case studies and thinking, well, where do I invest my time? This is what I would revise the most on. Section B, London and Sevenoaks, and obviously the next slide, which is really important, your case studies for your fieldwork. Let's have a look at those now. So I thought I'd just show you a couple of examples of what the case study questions will look like in this paper, because obviously they're slightly different from paper 1. In paper 1 you had to write big 8 markers, didn't you? Whereas in this paper they're not as important apart from the fieldwork. I would say the fieldwork is probably the most important case studies to revise, because in the fieldwork you're going to have to write an 8 marker on either the Feltham trip or the Brighton trip. However, you can see here a couple of examples of what they'll look like in the section A and the section B. Now they only ask 2 of these across the paper, or 3 is the most I've ever seen. I've put one on here from section A, which in this example is a river one. Now you have to name a river, okay? If you just talk generically, that means if you just talk in general about rivers, you don't get more than 2 marks. So even if you're kind of blagging this and you just put the River Thames or the River Arun or the River Rother, just a river that you know, but obviously it has to be in the UK, you immediately can then get up to 4 marks. So on this question, I've put, it could be any of the examples shown on slide 5, but these are much easier to blag. Like if it's a coast one, I could talk about Bognor if I need to. I could talk about Feltham, okay? Upland area, I could probably talk about a mountain that I visited some point in my life, the Scottish Highlands, whatever. For the other section though, section B, they normally put in 2 4-mark questions about London or a rural area that is dependent on the city. So if they say an urban area or a UK city, it's going to be London. If they put a rural area that is dependent on the city, it's going to be Sevenoaks in Kent. Now that is a lot harder to try and make up some knowledge on those in the exam. You could, if you really needed to, use Chichester as a UK case study. I have seen in the past students then put Bognor as a rural area that's dependent on Chichester, and that did get them some marks, but I would really spend your time revising that London and Sevenoaks case study. You need to know some specific facts, and I don't think that many of you will be able to just make up specific facts about Chichester or Bognor in the exam. So this is the kind of question you might get. There are examples of this in the mock paper you were given in class last week, and I've also put that on Arbor and email, so make sure you practice those at home in your own time, and feel free to send any to us as well if you're worried about this type of question, and we can give you feedback. Okay, now some people get a little bit overwhelmed with these fieldworks, but really they're just places we visited where we did some analysis, we tested some stuff, and we found some stuff out. And all you've got to do in the exam is tell the examiner what we did, how we did it, what was good or bad about it, and what did we find out in the end. Now there's some sheets we gave you in class, which I've also put on this PowerPoint to help you revise these just as case studies like you're doing for London. So these obviously aren't in your CGP guide. You're going to have to look at the next slides to help you. I've put on here the questions that we were investigating, and a simple 1-mark question in your exam might say, what was the question that you had when you investigated your coastal fieldwork? And you would get a mark simply for writing this question. If you can't remember the exact wording of the question, don't worry. Write something that's similar. How does coastal management protect people at Feltham Beach? That's fine. The key thing the examiner is looking for is the specific location you went to. You have to state Feltham Beach, West Sussex. You have to state Brighton, East Sussex. Again, in the exam, if you completely forgot, you could make up another coastal area. You could say we visited Bognor Beach, if that feels more appropriate. For the urban one, you could not refer to Bognor. Bognor is a town. It must be a city for the other one. So you could refer to Chichester, which is a city, and you could use that if you wanted to. You could use London if you felt able to do that because you've already revised it in section B. But let's now have a look at the kind of questions that might come up, because for this section, it's so important you revise these well, because one of the 8 markers will be all about the fieldwork that you did. So you have to be confident in telling the examiner very specific details about it. Let's have a look at those case study sheets for this now. So before we look at the case study sheets, I think it's important to note this. On the front of your exam, and this is a past paper exam from 2020, it will tell you this, and we will remind you this before the exam. You must only answer the coasts section C and the urban section C. You can see on the front page there it says answer all questions in section A and B. Fine. But when you get to section C, make sure you choose coasts, C1, and in C2, make sure you choose urban. Okay, you must answer both. okay? And you must not answer rivers and rural. It says it on the front of the booklet that every year students mess this up and they lose valuable marks and they waste time as well. So make sure you look at this carefully, and we'll have a look at the case studies now. So some students said that they'd really benefit from having clear ideas on the kind of questions that could be asked. So what we've done on this page, as you can see, is you've got clear ideas around what kind of questions might be asked, specific words that they might refer to in the exam as well. So this one's been done for our coastal fieldwork at Feltham Beach. If it was me revising this the night before, I would look at all those boxes. I would decide which of those are my weaker boxes where I think I can't really make that up. And I would just do a really simple look, cover, write, check. You've been doing that since primary school. And as you can see visually, these are really clear and straightforward to read. So if, for example, you didn't know different sampling methods, I would cover up the primary data, sampling, for example, and I would do a look, cover, write, check to see if I can revise that information. We'll have a look at another one now for the urban fieldwork in Brighton. On this slide, I really want to have a look at the kind of unseen fieldwork that you have to answer. And as you can see at the top, it says, read the whole story.
Another thing that throws some students off in this exam is the 8-mark questions. So I wanted to show you another example and how I would attack it in an exam. So Miss Pellegrino and I have been talking quite a lot to you about how we need to attack the question. And one of the ways that you can do this really easily is using the bug technique. So box the command word, you can see I've done that on this question, assess how far. And then UG stands for underline the geography. The geography in this question is coastal communities, protected from coastal flooding, rising sea levels. And what that does straight away is it focuses my attention on what the question is asking me to do. It cuts out all the fluffy extra bits. So I know that in this question I need 2 paragraphs. I need to think about how far coastal communities should be protected, given the threat of rising sea levels. And then the other part of the argument is probably going to be how far they should not be protected. Okay, so it's a really nice straightforward question, but I've cut through all of it by annotating it. You can see on the left-hand side then I've got this resource. I've never seen this before. I've never visited this place. What they want you to do is interpret resources, and you can annotate on it. You can pick out facts. I'm looking for facts that show me why areas should be protected. So for me, the fact that shows me it should be protected is that in Fairbourne's 2-mile-long Blue Flag Beach, it attracts visitors throughout the year. I'm going to say this is a reason for protecting the coastline because those tourists will bring lots of money into the area. That will support the local economy and help to improve the economy further and services, etc. In my second paragraph, I'm going to argue, however, to some extent, coastal communities should not be protected. And as I can see in figure 1C, the council will stop maintaining the sea defences, mainly because Fairbourne has a population of 721. This means that there aren't many people's homes to be protected, and therefore the benefit of protecting the coastline completely outweighs the value of those 721 properties because they can move elsewhere. In my conclusion, I'm going to argue that overall, many areas should be protected from coastal flooding, but only when the benefits actually outweigh the cost of the land. It needs to be a place that needs protecting because it brings in money to the area, or it has a high population, and preferably both of those. As you can see here, if it doesn't bring in enough money or there aren't enough properties there, then those places should not be protected. Money should be spent in other places where they are of more value. So by understanding the question first, then picking out key facts I'm going to use, I've then got a perfect 8-mark answer. All of my knowledge for that is coming from this resource. So I have to be really good at annotating and picking out the facts I need.
Okay, so I also wanted to talk to you briefly about the 8-marker where you will have to write about your own fieldwork. So you will have one section, either C1 or C2, where you write about a fake fieldwork some students did. And there's normally a clanger, normally something that was wrong with their trip, like maybe there was some data missing, or maybe it was the time of the day or tide times, for example, that affected it. Or maybe their sample size wasn't big enough. If it's the urban one, it might say they only collected data from 10 people, which obviously isn't representative. However, you will also have an 8-marker on one of your fieldworks. So for the other one they don't question you on, it will be something like this one shown on the screen. Now this one shown on the screen is in the mock fieldwork paper that you were all given before we broke up for half term if you attended your lessons. If you didn't attend lessons, then this mock and the other paper 2 mock, which is section A and B only, is on Arbor, and it's also been emailed home to your parents. So this is a really good opportunity to practice how you would answer this style of question. I've also shown on here a little text box which shows you P1, P2, conclusion. That's how we should be planning every 8-marker. You've been practicing that with your class teachers again and again over the last few lessons, so you should be absolutely expert at that now. Never rush into an 8-marker without a plan of what you're going to write about. There is a slide a bit later on which goes over how to write a really good 8-marker on the paper too, but make sure that you complete this paper as practice for your revision. Whilst we're on the topic of 8-markers, it's also important to note that on one of the 8-markers in your paper, it will have 4 marks available for SPAG, spelling, punctuation and grammar. And grammar also includes using geographical terminology. I've put on this slide how it will look on the front of your exam. You can see it says the marks available for spelling, punctuation and grammar are clearly indicated. And on one of the 8-mark questions on any section, it will say at the top, an additional 4 marks awarded for this. Now it's actually really easy to get 4 SPAG marks. Firstly, you have to remember to have written at least 1 paragraph. If you haven't written at least 1 paragraph, you cannot get the 4 marks for SPAG. So even if you have no idea on an exam question, always write something down on the one with SPAG marks, okay? Even if your paragraph is completely wrong, say it goes completely wrong and the structure of it is not using KUU, etc. As long as your spelling, your punctuation and your grammar of what you write and some geography keywords in there is good, you can still get 3 marks for actually writing something down. That is such an amazing win. That's the whole difference between a grade boundary for some of us. So let's make sure that we always attempt this one using our best handwriting, our best SPAG throughout, clear indication of separate paragraphs by using a separate line. And it also tells you at the end there. So this is at the start of the question, it will tell you it's got SPAG. At the end of the question, it will tell you it's got 4 marks for SPAG. So just pay particular attention to these and make sure you always write down that decent paragraph amount so we pick up those easy marks. Another really important thing, which your exam teachers have probably told you anyway in other classes, is that on the exam paper you'll have this sort of darker line and it says the total on the other side. It is so important that you do not write past that line, okay? This often happens at the end of an 8-marker. Don't do this on any paper for any subject, because basically when the papers get scanned, the computer, the people that are scanning them and marking them, doesn't read past that line. So anything that you write there is going to be wasted. You must make sure that you ask for extra paper and put the exam question number on that paper if you need it in the exam. It is likely in the paper 2, you probably will need extra paper. It's also likely in the paper 3, but this applies to all subjects. So please make sure you do not write past the line. Okay, so we're nearly at the end of this little night before news. I'm hoping that you found it useful so far. Please feel free to go back, replay it, pause it, use it while you're practicing. That's what it's meant for. I would just also do some 8-marker practice for this exam. Remember, it is so different from paper 1. You've got to look at the figures. You've got to pick out facts, numbers, names of places, percentages of what you can see. Now, we know that the map's going to be somewhere to do with the UK, or the graph. It's going to be UK data. That's all they're allowed to write about in this exam. It might have names of places in the UK that you've never heard of, and that's okay. The key thing that they're looking for is, can you see a pattern in something like the numbers or the data or the percentages? And you're going to have an 8 marker in section A on physical geography, an 8 marker in section B on UK geography, and then you've got 2 8 markers in section C, one in the coast section and one in the urban section. Okay, and we've looked at some of the fieldwork ones already, but what's really important is to understand the structure that you need to write with. Now, I told you that in order to get those 4 marks for SPAG, you absolutely need to write at least your 1 paragraph, okay? We're going to make sure we definitely pick up those SPAG points. I've put on here the structure that you need for targeting a 4, targeting a 5, and a 5+. And I would say more than ever in this exam, firstly, get through the short questions quickly so you've got time to plan these. And secondly, when you plan your writing for these, use the structure that I've shown underneath. Now, the first pattern that you can see is probably going to be a bit more obvious. For example, it might be like a rainfall graph or map, sorry, and then it might be a map showing where people live, population. You might go, okay, where it's rainier, less people live, and that's an obvious idea. But the second thing, the second factor you have to think about is something maybe slightly less obvious. It needs to be you using your geography to think, well, why else might people not want to live in those locations? Is it just down to rainfall? That's one idea. There must be another factor that's maybe more or less significant. And that's what students find challenging on this paper. So if your target grades are 4 and you only manage to find 1 pattern and use knowledge from the figure, that's going to get you 3 or possibly even 4 marks out of 8. That's half marks. And when we're thinking about grades, that's nearly a grade 5 you're working at to do that on every 8 mark question. If you write a little plan before and you're running out of time, so the P1, P2 conclusion, the examiner can mark that. You can get 2 marks out of 8 for writing a decent plan where the examiner can see what you would have written. So it's really essential that even if you find this really hard, if the words are challenging, we're going to write something down anyway. Copy what you can see from the figure. We will practice this on Tuesday, period 4, on 4th of June in class, but make sure that you practice some of these at home as well. Those of you targeting the highest level in your significant factor, you must consider which is the most significant factor and why. Thinking about words like, it affects the people at a national scale. That's bigger than local scale, so it's going to be more significant. It's a long-term factor. It's a physical factor which we cannot change or manage. This kind of language is what the examiner wants to see. Things about scale, things about long-term, and if you use the word sustainability at all in any of your answers, if appropriate, make sure you refer to social sustainability, economic sustainability, or environmental sustainability. Okay, and now the last slide, things I would use from now to the exam if I was revising for the paper 2 exam. So like I already said, you've got the CGP guide. Most of you have now got this at home. We have checked with you all to check you've got it. So dig that out if it's been hiding somewhere. Use the topic checklist that I showed at the start. And if there's anything that you're not sure on, then the first job is to go to your revision guide, look at that factor, do some look, cover, write, check, or do the end of topic quiz questions that are in the CGP guide. The second thing is I would revise my case studies, and we said we're going to focus on our fieldwork case studies first, then we're going to focus on London and Sevenoaks in the CGP guide, and then we're going to look at some of those other little ones from section A if we have time. The best way to revise those is flashcards. Look at those flashcards and facts before you go to bed at night, and they will get cemented into your long-term memory. Do it repetitively, that means again and again, to have the biggest impact. And the last thing is these 2 exam papers which are shown here, the mock for section A and B and the mock for fieldwork. We gave those out in lesson last week, but I'm going to put them on Arbor and email them home to parents. The mark scheme for those is also on Arbor, so please go and check your work on those. And the very last thing, which isn't shown on here, is a keyword glossary. I sent it out before for paper 1, but I'm going to email that out now. So you can revise some of those bigger keywords so that we know we can attempt every question, we're going to give everything a go, and you're going to smash it on this exam. Good luck.